In 1968, a ship crossed the Mediterranean carrying 200 tons of uranium. Its name was Shearsburg A, and on paper it was just another cargo vessel in international waters. But what happened next wasn't an accident, and it definitely wasn't routine. The uranium never made it to its official destination. The ship didn't sink. It wasn't attacked. It was intercepted covertly, precisely, and deliberately by.
If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your feedback helps shape what we cover next, and you being here keeps the conversation going. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.
Israeli intelligence. What unfolded was one of the boldest acts of nuclear smuggling in modern history, and the world barely blinked. This wasn't an improvised operation. It was part of a decades-long strategy. From the moment Israel was established in 1948, its leadership understood that military parity with its neighbors was impossible. The surrounding Arab states had larger armies, more land, and more resources. For Israel, the threat wasn't hypothetical. It was existential. Multiple wars broke out within years of its founding. The trauma of the Holocaust wasn't history, it was recent memory. David Ben-Gurion, the country's founding prime minister, made it clear Israel needed a deterrent that would make its destruction unthinkable. And that deterrent was nuclear. But nuclear weapons require infrastructure and, most importantly, uranium. That's where Mossad stepped in. Because if Israel couldn't get what it needed through official channels, it would get it through intelligence work. In the 1950s, Israel secured a clandestine partnership with France, which provided the core technology and equipment needed to build a reactor. With that, the Dimona facility in the Negev desert was born. The site would become the heart of Israel's undeclared weapons program, but even with a reactor, the fuel problem remained. Israel had no domestic uranium supply, and buying uranium in bulk wasn't simple. The market was heavily monitored, and the more suspicious the buyer, the more scrutiny it attracted. So Israel built a shadow network. Front companies were created, end-user certificates were forged, friendly officials in foreign countries were quietly recruited. Uranium began moving slowly, carefully, and mostly under the radar. Then came the Shearsburg A. The operation itself was textbook Mossad. A seemingly legitimate shipment was quietly diverted. Somewhere mid-route, the uranium was offloaded, most likely transferred to another vessel or redirected to an Israeli-controlled port. The details are still shrouded in secrecy, but what's known is that the material disappeared without detection and ended up in Israel. From a strategic perspective, it was flawless. No open confrontation, no international crisis, just a clean removal of 200 tons of nuclear material from the global supply chain. It wasn't just theft, it was quiet acquisition at scale. And this wasn't an isolated incident. Throughout the 60s and 70s, Mossad expanded its operations across multiple continents. In the US, the NUMEC facility in Pennsylvania reported missing uranium under highly suspicious circumstances. While no direct link was ever confirmed, many within the U.S. intelligence community believed that Israel was involved. Investigations dragged on for years. No prosecutions followed. Meanwhile, Israel established covert relationships with uranium suppliers in Argentina, Belgium, and elsewhere. But the most pivotal partnership was with apartheid South Africa. Both nations were under diplomatic pressure, both faced international isolation, and both were working toward nuclear capability. Israel needed uranium. South Africa needed technological support. The two states formed a discreet alliance, exchanging resources and expertise. Transactions were hidden under layers of legal ambiguity. Cargo shipments were disguised. Communications were routed through third countries. This wasn't just cooperation, it was full-spectrum clandestine trade. By the early 1970s, Israel had built a sustainable supply of uranium. With Dimona running and covert logistics secured, it had the capacity to produce plutonium and assemble nuclear weapons. Intelligence estimates place Israel's arsenal anywhere from 80 to 400 warheads. That number has never been officially confirmed because Israel has never acknowledged the existence of its weapons. Instead, it has relied on strategic ambiguity. No public tests, no declarations, no signatures on the Non-Proliferation Treaty. The policy has always been the same: never confirm, never deny. And this silence has worked better than any threat. After the 1973 Yom Kippur War, when Egypt and Syria launched a surprise attack, Israel was nearly overwhelmed. But it recovered quickly, and some believe its nuclear capability played a silent role. While never activated, the implied threat of escalation may have shaped how that conflict ended and why full-scale wars haven't returned. The deterrent was unspoken but understood. But with success came precedent. Israel had managed to bypass international oversight, exploit weak points in nuclear regulation, and acquire the deadliest weapons on Earth, all without triggering real consequences. No UN sanctions, no diplomatic isolation, just quiet acceptance. That precedent shook the foundation of global nonproliferation. Because if Israel could do it without signing treaties, without inspections, what stopped others from trying? The system was only as strong as the will to enforce it, and in Israel's case the will wasn't there. The US and its allies may have suspected what was happening, but geopolitics made confrontation inconvenient. Israel was a critical partner in the Middle East, publicly challenging it could risk the entire balance of regional alliances. So the uranium thefts, smuggling operations, and secret partnerships were quietly buried under diplomatic necessity. And that's the lasting legacy of the Shearsburg A. It wasn't just about the uranium. It was about what the operation represented, that global systems could be outmaneuvered and that when strategic value overrides legality, the rules bend. Israel didn't just build a nuclear arsenal, it redefined how one could be built. The intelligence tactics, mid-sea transfers, falsified documents, shell corporations became textbook case studies in how to avoid detection. These weren't desperate moves, they were carefully calculated risks executed with precision. To this day, Israel remains the only nuclear-armed country in the Middle East, and it has never officially admitted it. But everyone knows, and that quiet knowledge has reshaped the region. It's influenced how neighboring states think about their own security. It's affected negotiations with Iran. It's shaped the way proliferation threats are discussed in the halls of the UN and the IAEA because the system has already been circumvented once and successfully. Israel's nuclear rise didn't just change the Middle East, it changed the rules. And at the center of it all was a cargo ship no one talks about anymore. A ship that vanished into history, taking 200 tons of uranium with it. If you made it this far, drop your thoughts in the comments. Was this strategic brilliance or international failure? Hit like if this was a side of history you've never heard before and share it with someone who still thinks nuclear power follows the rules. Because the Shearsburg A wasn't just a heist, it was a turning point. And here's the part that still stings: no matter how you look at it, the Shearsburg A operation didn't just succeed, it redefined what success looked like for a clandestine state-run operation. Think about what Israel pulled off. They didn't have global backing for a nuclear program. They weren't signatories to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. They didn't have natural uranium reserves. And yet, they became the only nuclear-armed state in the Middle East and did so under the noses of the world's most powerful intelligence agencies. This was not a fluke, it wasn't luck. It was systematic. They built relationships with sympathetic foreign governments. They created shell corporations with clean paperwork. They moved material through legal gray zones. And when it came time to pull off the largest operation, Shearsburg A, they executed it with such precision that by the time anyone realized something was off, it was already over. No fallout, no headlines, just another shipment quietly gone missing at sea. What made it all possible was a deep understanding of how fragmented and politically sensitive the international system really was. Mossad didn't need to fight the rules, they just needed to work between them. Because the truth is, international nuclear controls aren't enforced by some global police force. They rely on voluntary cooperation, diplomatic leverage, and political will. If a country is aligned with a superpower, the likelihood of being sanctioned or isolated drops dramatically. Israel understood this. By aligning itself with Western interests during the Cold War, especially the United States, it insulated itself from real backlash. Even when American officials privately suspected what was happening, publicly they stayed quiet. Because condemning Israel would have risked unraveling a key alliance in a strategically vital region. So while Pakistan, India, and North Korea all faced some form of international pressure, Israel quietly kept moving forward. Every ton of uranium that changed hands, every covert deal with South Africa or European suppliers, every backdoor shipment, none of it derailed their progress. Because the entire program was built on ambiguity, misdirection, and the calculated silence of allies who had more to gain by ignoring the facts. Let's talk about the scale of what was achieved. Estimates suggest Israel may have produced enough plutonium for between 80 and 400 nuclear warheads. That range is wide, but it doesn't really matter. The bottom line is it's enough. Enough to deter. Enough to hold the balance of power in the region. Enough to guarantee that no full-scale war against Israel could be launched without unacceptable risk. And that deterrence worked. After 1973, the nature of regional conflict changed. Wars became shorter, skirmishes more common, but the massive, coordinated invasions that had defined Israel's early decades came to an end. Because nuclear weapons, even when unspoken, change everything. It's easy to look back now and say, well, it all worked out, but that depends on your definition of working. Sure, Israel gained strategic security. It became an untouchable force in the region. But it also exposed just how easy it is for determined states to circumvent international norms when the political payoff outweighs the cost of exposure. And that exposure, it never came. No country has been held accountable for helping Israel along the way. No international tribunal has reviewed the theft of uranium shipments. No Western leader has ever admitted to looking the other way while Mossad pulled uranium out of US and European supply chains. Instead, the world has simply adapted. The IAEA still calls for nuclear transparency. The NPT still holds conferences and treaties, but Israel remains outside the system, untouched. And with each passing year, the precedent gets stronger. Strategic importance beats legal compliance. That's the real legacy of Shearsburg A. It's not just about the uranium. It's about the message. If you're smart enough, careful enough, and valuable enough, the rules don't really apply. That's not a conspiracy theory, it's the sober lesson international analysts have had to live with ever since. The operation also forced a quiet evolution in how intelligence agencies view nuclear proliferation. Before Israel, the assumption was that weapons development would follow a predictable industrial path. You'd see reactors, test sites, government declarations, maybe even a signature on the NPT. Israel proved that nuclear programs could be built entirely in the shadows, using civilian cover, third-party suppliers, and diplomatic gray zones. It wasn't a nation breaking the rules. It was a nation sidestepping them so well that there was nothing left to charge them with. That shift changed everything. And it's part of the reason why nuclear tensions today, whether in Iran, North Korea, or elsewhere, are approached with so much more suspicion. The world saw what happened when one country successfully outmaneuvered the system. Now it has to assume others are doing the same. But there's one more angle to this. Israel didn't just outsmart international watchdogs, it also taught future proliferators how to do it. Iran's nuclear program, for example, has shown a clear understanding of how to operate under heavy scrutiny, dual-use technology, covert procurement, strategic ambiguity. None of this developed in a vacuum. Whether directly influenced or not, the tactics pioneered during Israel's rise have echoed across decades of proliferation. That's why Shearsburg A isn't just a historical oddity. It's a live wire running through the entire global security conversation. And let's not forget how bold it really was. This wasn't a spy sneaking documents out of a drawer. This was 200 tons of uranium disappearing from a cargo ship in open water. That's not subtle. And yet, because of the context, because of the players involved, and because of the cost of calling it out, the world collectively shrugged. And that shrug, it became policy. Israel's silence has always been its strongest strategy. Strategic ambiguity gave it the protection of doubt and the power of deterrence at the same time. The world knew, but because Israel never admitted it, no formal action could be taken. It became a geopolitical catch-22. So the weapons stayed out of sight. The missiles stayed unlaunched. And the doctrine remained unwritten. But the threat, that never left. Even without tests, even without declarations, even without public acknowledgement. Israel's deterrent has shaped every military and diplomatic decision in the region for over 50 years. And it all started with that missing uranium. So the next time you hear a politician talk about rules-based order or see a headline about nuclear inspections, Remember that one of the most consequential nuclear programs in history began with a stolen shipment buried in bureaucracy and shielded by silence. And maybe ask yourself, who else is learning from that? Because the system hasn't changed much. The safeguards still rely on cooperation, the inspections are still selective, and the geopolitics just as tangled as ever. The Shearsburg A wasn't just a Mossad success, it was a warning. A quiet message sent across international waters that said, if you want it badly enough and you know where the weak points are, you can take what you need and disappear. The real tragedy here isn't just that Shearsburg A vanished, it's that the world moved on like it never happened. The operation was a quiet pivot point, a moment where the rules, already fragile, simply gave way, and the world didn't stop to ask why. There was no press conference, no urgent summit, no flurry of accountability, just a silent adjustment of expectations. Israel got what it wanted, the rest of the world pretended not to notice, and the global order made space for a new, silent member of the nuclear club. That's not just a loophole, that's an entirely different playbook. And it worked because the silence was mutual. Israel never acknowledged the theft, the arsenal, or even the doctrine, and everyone else agreed not to force the issue. Because bringing it to light would mean admitting how weak the non-proliferation system really was. It would mean confronting uncomfortable questions: who helped, who looked away, who knew and said nothing. Nobody wanted that. So the story of Shearsburg A became a whisper, a rumor wrapped in policy silence. It didn't make the history textbooks. You won't find it in official timelines of nuclear development, and yet it fundamentally changed how nuclear weapons are discussed, pursued, and policed. It's the blueprint behind the blueprint. Even now, the legacy of the operation lives on, not just in Israel's unacknowledged arsenal, but in the quiet assumptions that shape every negotiation about proliferation. It's the reason why strategic ambiguity isn't just tolerated, it's respected. It's the reason inspectors tread carefully. It's why declarations matter less than intentions. And it's why every state considering the nuclear path has studied what Israel pulled off. Because here's the harsh truth: Shearsburg A proved that if you're serious, patient, and protected, you can rewrite the rules. And that precedent is still echoing. When Iran negotiates limits on its nuclear program, when North Korea demands recognition, when the global community scrambles to stop the next proliferator, it's all happening in the shadow of what Israel already did. A covert operation, a missing ship, a pile of uranium that slipped through the cracks. It's easy to focus on the weapons, but this story isn't just about warheads, it's about legitimacy, about how power is acquired, maintained, and justified. Israel never asked for permission, it acted, and because it acted decisively, it didn't need permission later. That's what deterrence really is. It's not just a threat, it's the ability to make the conversation stop. And Israel made the conversation stop before it ever really started. No tests, no signatures, no policy papers, just a quiet understanding that some things don't need to be said because everyone already knows. And yet, the risk is still there, because the more the system tolerates these quiet exceptions, the more fragile it becomes. At some point, someone will follow the same path and not stop at ambiguity. And then what? Because when one country shows that proliferation can be pulled off without punishment, it only takes one more to show what happens when that power is actually used. That's why Shearsburg A matters. It's not just history, it's a live issue buried under decades of diplomatic silence. And still, the world pretends this ship just got lost. But you know better now. So drop your thoughts below. Was this strategic genius or a crack in the foundation of international security? Hit like if this story challenged the way you think about nuclear power, and share it with someone who needs to know the story that never made the headlines. And don't forget to subscribe, because history didn't forget this, it just chose not to talk about it.